one thing that I'm sure people will say is I do not give up easily. I am very stubborn, and it's my greatest blessing, and it is my greatest curse at the same time. But it has gotten me to where I am.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Today, I am so excited to have a special guest, Jocelyn Dettloff, on the show. Coming to us from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Jocelyn is an inspiration to many. Jocelyn acquired a spinal cord injury at the age of 26 while on an adventure in Namibia, Africa. And now she's the author of her memoir, It Rained in the Desert, One Woman's Story of Spirit and Resilience. Jocelyn is also a motivational speaker, and she is the Major Gifts Director at the Mary Bed Foundation. And she is the Major Gifts Director at the Mary Free Bed Foundation. Jocelyn, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me as a guest. I'm thrilled to do this.
It is absolutely an honor to have you here and to have you share your story with our audience here on Talks with Dr. Shafer. I am so appreciative that you reached out to me because it is truly an honor because of not only the amazing story that you have, but how you have reclaimed your story. And I want to share something with our audience that we were actually talking about off screen before we started taping. And I always create an introduction for guests. And you corrected me on my language because it was really important that the story be yours and from your perspective. So I would love to dive into hearing your story and your perspective on how it has shaped you. Because as you said, I had said you had suffered a spinal cord injury, and you pointed out that you didn't suffer an injury, that you acquired a spinal cord injury. And I really appreciate you helping to reframe that. And I'm so appreciative that you're here to share your story with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here as well.
So tell us about what this experience was like. You have always had an adventurer's spirit, and this was one of your many adventures. Paint a picture for us what life was like in your 20s, what led you to Namibia, and then what happened on that day.
Yeah, so I was not one of these people who knew what she wanted to do when she grew up. I don't even know if I could say that I am doing now what I thought I would do when I grow up. But, you just follow certain paths and opportunities that life puts in front of you. But I went to the University of Michigan, graduated with a degree in English Lit, and not knowing what I wanted to do, I decided to travel after graduation. So my graduation present to myself was a 6-week trip in Europe, and none of my friends could go with me. I thought about doing the Eurail Pass thing, but not having traveled overseas, I wasn't sure of that whole process. So I signed up with a company, and so I went over to London by myself to meet up with this group that I would be with for 6 weeks. And I was the only person from the States. Everybody else was from Australia, New Zealand, Canada. And it just really opened my eyes as to how much the rest of the world traveled. So after doing that, I came back to Ann Arbor. I was waiting tables there after graduation. And one of the Canadian girls that I met on the trip said, my friend and I are going to go to Australia and New Zealand for a year. Do you want to go? Well, sure. Like, who wouldn't want that kind of opportunity? So I got to backpack through Australia and New Zealand for a year. Came back to Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is my hometown. Did a bunch of odd jobs, bartended, whatnot, and decided sub-Saharan Africa was my next destination. I have never been great at goal setting or like having a clear vision or path for where I wanted to go. So my plan was I was going to go on the 3-month camping trip to Africa, starting in Kenya, finishing in Cape Town, A friend of mine from high school, I was going to go stay with her over in Galway, Ireland for 3 months. Then after that, come back to the States and do, I'm really not sure what. But at least that was my plan when I left for my trip in February of 1997. So traveling over 2 months or so into my trip, yes, I was sledding down a sand dune, flew off the board at the bottom of the dune, and broke my back. It's at thoracic 5, which is basically chest level. And I mean, people say I fake it really well, but everybody looks at me and think that I'm paralyzed from the waist down because I like to sit up straight. But with every level of the spinal cord, there's you lose function, gain function. But to be honest, I had my surgery and medical treatment in Namibia, and the medical care there was excellent. To be honest, I did have to wait for a plane for 3.5 hours to come and get me because we were in such a remote area. But had paramedics been able to get there in 2 minutes, the damage would have been the same, just of how my spinal cord was injured. The doctors there were fantastic. I do recall the very first being taken into the ER, the doctors, walking around me, kind of flicking sand off of me. And the very first words he said to me, even before introducing himself, he said, "I want you to know you'll probably never walk again." And there was just like this little voice inside of me that said, okay. And not that, okay, yay, life is going to be great, but just not a like anger reaction, not a, oh my God, fretting or worrying or anything like that, but just a very calming kind of, okay, well, this is my situation now, so what am I going to do? Had surgery there. They stabilized my spine. I came back to Michigan and did my spinal cord rehab at Mary Free Bed. And after 8 weeks of being inpatient rehab, I stayed here in Grand Rapids because it worked out better with housing and outpatient therapy and whatnot. So Grand Rapids has been home for, well, actually, April 13th is when my accident happened. So I just surpassed my 28th anniversary, which is astounding to me because it does not seem like it has been that long. But I'm like, that's a generation right there. And I will have to say, like reflecting back on it, it's like my life is very normal in terms of how I do things, the things that I do, the activities that I do. I just do them differently. But, I work full time. I have hobbies. I play tennis. I play pickleball. I still travel. I socialize with friends and whatnot. And it's not to say that those things don't have their challenges, because they do. Navigating the world on 4 wheels instead of 2 legs is a huge eye opener for people. People who maybe know me in more of a social setting, but if they ever travel with me anywhere or they spend a considerable amount of time with me, they kind of see some of the challenges that I may encounter. And actually, real life, probably within the past month to 3 weeks, I have encountered a situation of I am leaving a place of business or somewhere like in a strip mall or something like that, and somebody has conveniently parked right in front of the curb cut where I'm supposed to get off the sidewalk. And I get it. They're not doing it on purpose, but they're just not very aware. So it's just those small little things that, can add up to some frustrations because, again, most people don't really think of it. But, my life is very full. And, I know that, as you said in your intro, and people tell me, they do find me inspiring. And to me, I'm kind of like, well, I don't know why, because I just live my life like everybody else does. But I also do acknowledge that, yes, people find it inspiring that I do a lot despite the other challenges that I have. But it's important to be in life and living it rather than just kind of watching it pass by. But that has been my nature even before my spinal cord injury. So thank God some things never change.
Well, I so appreciate you sharing your story with such vulnerability. And I believe that that is the thing that we find so inspiring. It's less so the mechanics, the data points in a story, but it's how someone chose to respond to their circumstances. Like you said, for you, something about who you are and your circumstances led you to a pretty quick degree of acceptance and then moving forward to recovery. And you weren't for 1 second going to stop living your life because you've always seemed to understand this. And I reflected on something you shared about how you didn't have a plan for your life. But from an outsider's perspective, and again, this goes back to the inspiring, the experiencing you as an inspiring individual, it feels like the plan was always to live your life and to not waste time and to lean into the things that you found fulfilling. And I think that there's so much to learn from that and to see how you, despite acquiring this disability, how you have continued to lean into life and live the way you wanted to. So I find that very inspiring, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. I would love to hear your reflections as we talk about the frustrations that you have in daily life on whether or not you feel that there's an increasing disconnect between people who don't have these extra challenges and understanding and respecting the rules that are in place because of the American Disabilities Act and the way that we try to keep public spaces accessible. Is there a change in people's perception with that over time?
Yes. And over time, it has become more positive. And I also, like in terms of like marketing and advertising and television, very, very slowly, like you are seeing um, more people with disabilities in, like, for example, right now I'm watching The Residents, like, on Netflix, and I have noticed that in the crowd of attendees at the state dinner, that's part of the story, that there's a woman using a wheelchair and there is a man using a wheelchair. Not necessarily speaking roles or anything like that, but if people don't even see something, someone, some element, part of the story, part of the prop, part of the setting, it's not going to even enter their mind that, oh, like this could be possible. The first job that I had after my, well, I should say, full-time job. I did work part-time at a local bookstore here in Grand Rapids. But my first full-time job was for an organization called Disability Advocates of Kent County. And it's where I got my start in fundraising and whatnot. But, searching so much, like trying to find like empowering, high quality, like imagery or stock photos of people with disabilities, so many of the images are the person, especially if they use a wheelchair, they're being helped in some way. The person in the chair is not the one leading the seminar. They're not doing the teaching. They're not in the professional role. It's more of, how are they being helped? But then you would Google things like someone who may have use a prosthetic limb or something like that. And it's all these like super powerful, like athletic, I mean, just more positive imagery. Now, granted, it's been a long time since I've had that role of having to go and look for stock photos and disability and whatnot, so things may be different. But so there's that. And, and just from, like, as you said, my ability to be able to, like, move on and thrive and so much. I mean, honestly, Mary Freebed had a lot to do with that because they teach, I mean, this is what rehabilitation medicine is. Whether you've had a stroke, whether you've had a brain injury, a spinal cord injury, they teach you all that you need to learn, to know, here's the equipment, and they set you up to do the things that you want to do. With my plan, after coming back from Ireland and not knowing, what I was going to do, one thing that I did know is I was at a spot in my life where I wanted to live by myself. With college roommates, moving home, whatnot, I had never lived on my own. Well, thinking about staying here in Grand Rapids, I honestly didn't see why that goal should change. So after 8 weeks of rehab, I had all the tools, equipment, whatever, found a barrier-free apartment here in Grand Rapids, and I moved out to live by myself. And I know that that's an unusual story, that doesn't happen a lot. But again, it's like they want to help you achieve whatever goals you have. And I will say, like when I was in Africa, Namibia is a very Christian country. My physicians there, they said, allow your body 7 years to heal itself. And when they said that, I did not think for a second that they meant, woo, okay, in 7 years, you're going to be up and walking. But, when your body suffers such a trauma or experiences, it does take time, a year, 18 months. And, the central nervous system, the spinal cord, those nerves don't regenerate. They don't regrow, but your peripheral nerves can. And, I even so 2 years ago now, I actually had my Mary Freebed Part 2 story. I had a cervical fusion in my neck because I was losing strength and function in my left arm. I had a lot of stenosis, and the nerves were getting pinched coming out of the left side of my neck. Well, my C5, my cervical 5 nerve, was very much negatively impacted. I lost a lot of function right after surgery. But it's been 2 years now, and I have worked my tail off in terms of still like lifting weights, working out, doing all of these things. And now it is almost back to 100%. One thing that I'm sure people will say is I do not give up easily. I am very stubborn, and it's my greatest blessing, and it is my greatest curse at the same time. But it has gotten me to where I am. And and with that, like when I try to educate people about how things could be better, or oh, have you thought about making this change? Like, I never, I mean, of course, I speak for myself, and I can't ever represent or speak for everybody that has a disability, but I do not want to be that, and I do call it a stereotype because some people might think, oh, that angry disabled person. And, people often ask me if I need help going to Costco. Yes, I go to Costco by myself. I push the cart in front of me. Many times people, offer, oh, do I need help getting something? Do I need help getting stuff in my car? Or even getting my chair in sometimes. But, if I need help, sure, I'll ask, or I'll, gratefully accept it. But if I don't, I just politely decline because, I don't want to snap at anybody. If they have never asked anybody with a disability if they've needed help before, and I snap at them or say something rude or snippy, my goodness, I bet you they will never ask anybody ever again. So I do try to be a bit mindful of that. But, I mean, the only way that things change is if people educate or if people say something. And, it all has to start somewhere. And yes, there is the ADA and certain design codes and stuff like that, but just because it says that it's accessible in a design book does not mean that it's the most practical.
Mm.
Um, so, and I think the aging population actually is very beneficial to everybody, not only people with disabilities, but as people age, they still want to go out and do all the things that they used to be able to do. And and I just think, so much more can be, people with disabilities and their families and their relatives, like they have money to spend, and where they choose to spend that money. I had a little my car got sideswiped a couple of weeks ago on my way to work. I was in it, but I had to select a body shop to take it to. And so a couple that were recommended to me, I was like looking them up online, and I even, maybe drove past like one or two, and one of them was not wheelchair accessible.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, if businesses think that they're not losing business because because their front door isn't accessible, yeah, I mean, I didn't call up that business and say, hey, did you know that I didn't come there because, but anyways, yeah, there's a lot of factors sometimes that go into where I choose to like use for like, yeah, to spend my money and do my business and all that.
Yeah.
For sure.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, and I've heard you reflect on this before about how, we worry about how we're showing up in the world and how we're seen, but the reality behind people is the way that our brains are formed. We have a big ego. We think and see things from our own perspective, right? So we may think, oh gosh, I know you had reflected earlier interviews about what it was like to go back into the community after your injury and feel seen with this new set of circumstances, and how you quickly understood that maybe people would glance for a moment just because they're getting data about their environment, but then they pretty quickly move on because they're living their lives and they're stuck in their world. I think it's important to also understand that when it comes to things like access, if someone hasn't had that challenge before in their life, they won't see that it's lacking. And it's really good to be the squeaky wheel and say, hey, I know you may not notice this, and I don't blame you for not noticing it. But by the way, I can't come to your store, and I would have loved to, but I simply can't.
Right.
Is there something that you could do, invest in your business so someone like me can enjoy being there too? And I think there's a lot of value in doing so and speaking up.
Yeah, and I mean, and just within the past, since the ADA was passed, but I mean, people with disabilities are just out and about and living in the world so much more than they ever were before, which is a great thing. And we just have to, despite the challenges that we face, because, there's always room for improvement. And again, the age of a building, the age, or certain segments or sections of the city, it all just depends on where you live and how much is able to be done, because I get it. Architectural modifications are challenging at times, but I notice when people like make the extra effort to make it accessible for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For us in our family home, we had a stair lift put in because a family member needed that. And we've had several family members over my lifetime. My sister, prior to her passing, she was in a wheelchair. She had muscular dystrophy, which is a degenerative neuromuscular condition. And so we've experienced that as a family. And I purchased this home that had no bathroom, no full bathroom, rather, no shower, no bedroom on the first floor. And I recognized in hindsight how silly that was. After I had my second child and I had an emergency C-section, I lost over half of my blood volume, right? So here I am, this new baby, fresh out of surgery, very anemic.
Yeah.
And I'm having to crawl up the stairs, right? And so
Yeah.
I remember that experience. So when we had this chair put in and then there was recovery and they said, we can have that taken out if you want. I said, no, no, no. I want to keep that in because I never want, myself or anyone else in my home, if something
Mhm.
happens in the future, to not be able to access facilities that I would like them to be able to take for granted, even though we know we can't take them for granted. I don't want them to not have that access and that accessibility. And so that really comes back to this idea of bringing visibility to these other experiences of life so that we are more inclusive in the way that we design new spaces, update older spaces so that everyone has access to them. On that note, I wanted to discuss something that I've heard you talk about that I think is really important, which is community resources for people from day one. So after an accident, not everyone will have access to recreational therapies or easy access even to occupational and physical therapy. There may be a lot of travel involved. You may not have access to public transportation depending upon where you live, especially here in the United States.
Mhm.
And so there can be a lot of barriers to recovery. I'd love to hear your insights on that and maybe ways that people can access these resources even if they're in a smaller community.
My only experience with rehab has been Mary Free Bed. And, so because this is what I experienced, I think, oh, doesn't everybody have rehab like this? And the answer is no, they don't. We call, the Mary Free Bed way, we keep expanding into different states and whatnot. But having played wheelchair tennis for over 20 years and traveled to a number of different tournaments and speaking to different athletes, across the country, what people have available to them can vary greatly. As you were saying, do you live in a rural area, or even if you do live in a city, their rehabilitation, may not be as thorough. If you have to like rehab a knee from knee surgery, that's one thing. But when you have to completely relive or, learn how to do everything because of a spinal cord injury, because, your legs don't work, you don't have function in your torso, or maybe you don't have full, hand dexterity, that's a completely different thing. In terms of accessing, even so, when we had to shut down for COVID, there were through telehealth, like they were doing like OT or even PT appointments virtually. And granted, sometimes, yes, with PT, you do need it, hands on, right, in, in in front of you. But even for like, psychology appointments, those are very, easy to do virtually. And, with rec therapy, it's something that we offer inpatient here. And, the beauty of rec therapy is either finding activities that you used to enjoy doing and doing them again, maybe in a different way, or finding something completely new. We are fortunate to have a very robust wheelchair and adaptive sports program at Mary Free Bed. And we then impact all of West Michigan. So it's not just people who live here in Grand Rapids, but kind of in the whole, Kalamazoo, like Holland, Lakeshore. That people, come to Grand Rapids to participate in our sports programs. And, you know, honestly, rec therapy is not something that is reimbursed by insurance. So it is something that Mary Free Bed does because it's part of healing the whole person. And, I think that we just have a very can-do sort of attitude here in, I don't know if it's West Michigan, but if you want to figure out a way to do something, an activity, like we'll figure out a way for you to do it. And in terms of, I'm not very familiar with, other states and all like, what they have available. But, even in terms of, like getting active and exercising. Oh my, even like Googling, people with disabilities. I know with a lot of like older people, they have things like chair yoga or sit exercise. And while I do know that some of those still engage lower limbs and whatnot, there may be resources to find on online. But when you have like even right after my accident, I was on Medicaid, I was on Social Security disability for about 2 years or so. Um, it's using like finding resources that may be available to you, even if it is for a short period of time. Um, but and just by nature, like I tend to seek stuff out, like to be a little bit more engaged and all right, well, this is what I want to do. Like I said, I might not necessarily like know, like have a huge goal way down the road, but it's like, okay, well, this is what I want to do. Like, let me figure this out. And so I don't know. One thing is like, are there any sort of like, recreational, adaptive sport teams, organizations, something in the area that you you live? And granted, you know, the Google did not really exist, I don't think, like when I acquired my spinal cord injury. So, there's so much virtually that takes place now. And even when it comes to travel, um, you know, yeah, Europe is an old country, but you know what? People who use chairs live there. And, I think that there's even, opportunities there to find out much more ahead of time what will work, what won't work, and all of that.
Makes me think about your mindset early on in your recovery and how that has evolved as your rate of recovery was changing and as you're adapting and taking on new life challenges and new life events and just new seasons of life. What are some things that helped you navigate with regards to your mindset and your approach to daily life that armed you with this sense of resilience?
A couple of things. So I don't want to give the impression of, and maybe I kind of said this earlier, that, oh yeah, that little voice inside of me said, okay. And then I 100% accepted this and just moved on from there. One thing that really helped me was keeping a journal. I mean, I was a big journaler before my accident, and I continued journaling after. And thank God I did, because not only, so I kept those journals, and by nature, I am not one that wears my heart on my sleeve. I'm not like, confiding to the person that I'm standing in line at the grocery store like I talk to them, but I just, I'm not this, oh, my life is like one wide open book kind of thing, especially because I did learn early on, the more comfortable I seemed or the more okay I seemed with what happened to me, it made everybody else more okay with it too. And so when I was writing in my journal, that took all of I was angry and I was depressed. And I think that was like my main outlet. A couple of years after my accident, I did start taking an antidepressant, which also helped. And, but I always really focused on the next thing. And that's what, rehab or just, you know, finding something new. Like I took a drawing class just because, I'm like, oh yeah, they say you can learn how to draw, and you can. I have no natural ability for it at all, I can tell you. But, if you have an interest in something, um, you know, e- explore it. when it came to getting a part-time job, I was working in a bookstore 6 months after my accident, but I knew that I didn't want to, you know, sit home and not do much. Um, so, and even, with my cervical fusion and that setback there, I'm always focused on like the next thing, like what can I do? How can I make this better? Um, because, you know, a lot of, and I know people just want to take a pill or people want an easy fix with a lot of things. And sometimes there just isn't one, that there is a lot of work involved. People can do hard things maybe when they thought that they couldn't. And before I started writing my book, I went through and I reread my journals. And, you know, I forgot how hard it was at the beginning. And it made me really proud, like of myself, of how far I have come. And, um, the challenges don't go away. They just may take on, different forms or, a new challenge of the day, the week, the 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 year. But focusing on um, that next thing, and also, I keep in mind people don't do things intentionally. Like they're not building something, or honestly, like again, my curb cut situation that I mentioned. One happened last night. I was leaving a meeting and the guy was just happened to be like parked right in front and he was still in the car. So I just like knocked down his window and I said, "Hey, you're in the." He's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." He just didn't know. And I get it. Those things happen. Um so, what is the magic to being resilient? Or you know, one thing to keep in mind, like whatever things are like today, like it's not going to be like that forever. I do, peer mentoring for newly injured patients here at Mary Free Bed. And I just remember how long things took at the beginning, how long it took to put on a pair of pants. Um, how long, oh my gosh, getting in and out of the car. I remember getting timed. Like, okay, we're going to practice getting in the car and getting your chair in. 6 minutes and like 30 seconds was like, and now it's like a minute. So, things get faster, things change, things do get better. Um, but, on the bad days, on the sad days, and I've even like evolved myself to acknowledge, um, you know, when, because I do have a tendency to just like, push things away, not give them the, um, the space to exist that things do. And this is even something within like the past year and a half that I've gotten better at, is just when I am sad, allowing myself to be sad. Like it's okay. Like, when I am angry, allow myself to be angry. It's not like I'm going to, that I have to go off and like, I don't know, start rampaging or like go yell at somebody. Although I do kind of jokingly say, I do feel sorry for the one person in my future, whoever that will be, that on this one day is going to receive all of my pent up frustration from 20 some years. And like I say, I jokingly say that probably won't ever happen. But we all have days like that where it's just that one little thing and it surprises us how it sets us off. Um, but yeah, So even how I deal with, or how I find myself to practice resilience more now, I'm 54. Gosh, I can't even believe I'm saying that. But I've learned a lot the past 28 years and how I respond to things. And yeah, and I still always try to um, be firm or educate, but also to be kind about it and not mean or not angry.
Yeah, those aren't mutually exclusive. And actually, honesty is kindness. And that's something I think that culturally we may have forgotten or been enticed to misunderstand,
Mhm.
right? Because we have been often sold this bill of this niceness that is not kindness. It
Mhm.
is kinder to be direct when someone is parked in a way that you can't get down. It is kinder to tap on the window and say, "Excuse me, this is the ramp. I do need you to move." With you can say it with a smile, right? You don't have to be angry, but that is kinder than being, I don't even know what nice is, just sitting
Yeah.
there and suffering and then later getting that anger built up. And then when the next person does it or 4 times down the road it happens, you blow up at them and they think, well, golly gee, if you just told me I would have moved. I'm so sorry. I didn't do it on purpose, you know? And,
Yeah.
and so I think there is magic and authenticity and honesty that when we're trying to be nice, we miss out on. But if we're being kind and
Mhm.
honest, then we can communicate better and we can all show up better because often we just have blind spots for things we're doing because they don't affect us. But someday down the road, they very well might affect us or someone we love or that's a part of our daily life. And that brings me to something that I really wanted to discuss with you as someone who is the major gifts director for the Mary Free Bed Foundation, and you are working with helping people with disabilities get what they need and making sure the program is honoring and serving that population of patients and their families. There is a shift right now because of the way people are perceiving DEI and encouragement of diversity and how we support making sure everyone has a seat at the table in businesses, in charities, in schools, in our communities. There is, I think, a misunderstanding about what that means. And because of that misunderstanding, we are experiencing some pretty severe consequences to our communities, to businesses, to charities, to universities, because people don't understand how widespread the effect is when we push back against celebrating diversity and encouraging diversity. What have you experienced and what are your insights as to how it affects the community of people with disabilities?
In general, where you have different groups represented, different ages, different ethnic backgrounds, different ab- uh, abilities, like the culture is richer, and people learn from each other. And I think just like going forward, people need to do what they can to be mindful not to lose um, the the core values of that, because yes, institutions, many places are being forced to publicly change wording, change programs, that type of thing. And I yeah, when the latest thing, the latest anything, like just deep down, I'm like, can't we all just love each other? Can't we all just get along? Um, and it is, when you start looking at, oh, is this a protected class? Is that not a protected class? Is um, a lot of times, it so much of this can create fear in people.
Mm.
And like with anything, like people operate so differently if you're coming at if you operate out of fear versus operating out of love. And that goes with anything. I mean, kind of like, your whole thing, your distinction between niceness and kindness. Um, you're walking down the street or rolling down the street, somebody is approaching you who is very different from you in whatever regard that could be. And if you are very, oh my God, this person is different, like, and start to be like, oh my God, what are they going to do to me? Or, you know, the vibe you give off is very different than you're approaching them and just saying hi, making eye contact, approaching it from more of a love standpoint than a, oh my God. And so I know I'm not answering probably completely, but it's just I think it's very disheartening to see a lot of what is happening, and just to say, you know, deep down try to approach things from more of like a love standpoint rather than a fear standpoint. But given certain circumstances, some situations are much more challenging than others.
I appreciate that. And our power lies, there's this information that I've heard recently that I really appreciated. It really resonated with me, that it takes, 100 score times more energy to fight a mistruth than it takes to simply tell the truth. And so often when we are in these situations where something's happening and we're thinking, oh, this doesn't feel just, this doesn't feel right, we are tempted to speak out against it, which is really important. But I think the greater power is in elevating stories that tell the truth. Because if we have a million stories that tell the truth, that one story that doesn't really represent where our hearts are as people, and it represents more the fears that aren't even ours, they're trying to be pushed upon us, right? If we lean into the love that comes from seeing one another's stories and seeing each other as people, I think that's where our power lies in creating a more inclusive world that is accessible to everyone in every way, shape, or form, whether they have a physical disability or they have mental health concerns that lead to them needing certain supports. We all need support in one way, shape, or form. We all do. No one gets out of this life without challenges and ways they need support. And the importance of sharing these stories, in my mind, as I see it, is to bring perspectives to us that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And that's, I believe, the incredible inspiration and power behind you sharing your story on the podcast today, as well as in your book. Now, what has been your experience of having to go back retrospectively, look at those journals, relive that time that, as you've mentioned, that you recognize looking back, wow, this is more difficult and challenging than I even recalled because of your personality and the way that you process things. Like, wow, I did this, and this is where I am from that. What has that experience been like to share your story in this really vulnerable way?
It does make me laugh when people say, "Oh, you've been so you've been so vulnerable," because I think just on a daily basis in my interactions with people, I may not come across as very vulnerable, but I'm getting a little bit better at that. Um, so having because the book was published in 2013, and 2 years ago I recorded it on audio. And in order to practice, I actually at home read the book out loud, and that gave me an opportunity because I hadn't read my own book since it came out, or working on the chapters and whatnot. So um, it had like it allowed me to process a lot of the very emotional parts of it before going into the studio and then like breaking down into tears or whatever at like some of the more emotional parts. And one thing that I have learned, that letting things go is so much part of moving on. Like the decision that I made to go sledding down that sand dune, I never beat myself up about it. I never really asked myself, why did this happen to me? Because you know what? There's no good answer. You're never going to get an answer. Why bother dwelling on it? Because it's okay, it happened. Well, let's move on now. And so, and so many people hang on to so many things in life, old grudges, things with friends and family of, oh my gosh, well, this person never did this. Oh, it is such a like weight off your shoulders to be able to finally let it go. And it takes a lot of energy to hang on to negative emotions, anger, fear, all of that, and to be able to just let it go is a very magical thing. Um, a lot of comments that people have made to me. First of all, they say that they've learned so much about just disability in general, some of the challenges I've faced, some of the rather ridiculous things that people without disabilities do when around people with disabilities, especially people in chairs. And like even I recently spoke somewhere, and a woman who was part of the audience, she reached out, and I just sent me a message, saying how much like what I said impacted her. And I saved that email and I even let her know. I'm like, thank you for sending this, because on my bad days, reading something like this, um, gives me hope, or, makes me realize that, yeah, we're all here for, a reason or a purpose. And one of my other things that I've gotten better at doing lately is, you know what? If somebody has inspired you, if somebody has motivated you to do something, if somebody, for whatever reason, just did something and really made your day, tell them. They are never going to know if you don't tell them, and they may think that it's absolutely nothing. But I've just been lately better about, and I think that that woman's email to me reinforced that, because, she was just expressing her opinion, and whatever, however I read it, it just really, I needed to hear it. And so that is one thing that we can all do, I think, for each other, is a little positive reinforcement, and just, again, sharing the love, because we definitely all need more of that these days.
We do. And I so appreciate you sharing your message here. It has been very inspiring for me. And I'm certain that you've inspired many listeners. And I hope educated people who may not have had this experience in their life, so that they have these new tools moving forward with other people they interact with in their lives and communities. And also that feeling of being seen and heard that we all need. We need to see ourselves in our community. We need to see ourselves in media. It's really important to be inclusive in this manner, because it really just helps broaden our perspective of the world. And as you said, on the bad days, this too shall pass. Nothing
Yes.
stays the same. The good days are also the same. Nothing stays the same in life. So the more we understand about the life experience, we're just more equipped, I believe, for surfing the waves of life, rather than getting dragged down below when we're stuck in that fear, and we're stuck in that feeling of can't do, and have that can do attitude that you have brought to your life. And that, as you mentioned, Mary Free Bed has brought to the recovery, to the therapeutic approach to helping people after they've had an incident, an accident like you experienced in your life. How can our listeners connect with you, invite you to speak, get your book, and even potentially participate in your charity work with the Mary Free Bed Foundation?
Well, I do have a website, jocelyndettloff.com, and there are links. There is a link there to purchase the book. You can find it on Amazon. The audio is available through Audible. And, through maryfreebed.com, you can find the foundation website and just learn more about the services and the, where we are growing, because now we've expanded recently into Virginia and West Virginia. So, the more we can deliver the way of Mary Freebed rehabilitation, the better, because more people will just uh, start thriving earlier on from a traumatic incident. And that's why we exist, to restore hope and freedom. And that is just something, that's our tagline, and it is 100% true.
Well, we love to see that growth and so appreciate you sharing your message. And I have to say, I really, really appreciate that you were the voice actor for your own book, because I think it is so much more of an immersive experience and a personal experience when you get to enjoy an audiobook that's spoken by the person who really experienced that, if you're looking at a memoir or a specialist guide to something. So I'm so grateful that you did it that way, and everyone go and access that and enjoy it. Is it available on Audible for people to get as well?
Yes.
Excellent. So you can go access that on Audible and enjoy it and share it with someone in your life that you think would be inspired and supported as well by Jocelyn Dettloff's journey. Jocelyn, thank you so much again for being here today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for this opportunity. This conversation was a joy. It'll set the tone for the day.
Wonderful. Oh, and that's what we all need, right? We need to set the tone for our day. And as you mentioned, decide every day ways that we can show ourselves, things that we can do, get those data points. That's something we talk a lot on the show. And you have experienced that in your life when you were recovering. What can I do today? Right. And so you embraced art, you embraced working at a bookshop, you embraced new adventures. They may have looked different than the adventures you'd had before the accident in Namibia, but they were big adventures nonetheless, and they've led to incredible experiences. So thank you so much for sharing those. And storytellers, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of our inspiring guest episodes. And in May, we are resuming our short Mindset Mastery Talks with Dr. Shafer on Thursdays. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.